thank you for being here. Helicon West is an uncensored public reading series. We regularly host published authors alongside community writers to promote and support all levels of skill, ability, and craft. If you would like to read during the open mic, you can sign up right here. And if you would like to donate to keep Helicon West going, we have bookmarks on the coffee table with a QR code link. We acknowledge that Helicon West operates on the territory of the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation. Our events are made possible with support from Sugar House Review, the Logan Library, the USU English Department, and community volunteers. For our full band acknowledgement statement, interviews with featured readers, merch, and more, visit heliconwest.wordpress.com. We have a couple of requests in our new home in the library. First, during our event, please shut the doors behind you when entering or leaving the room. There will don't be afraid of that.
Yeah, do it anyway.
Do it anyway.
Right on cue.
Yep.
And second, if you partake of your coffee, please use a lid and keep the cup in your hand to minimize the likelihood of a spill. Consider bringing your own reusable drink container with a screw-on lid. That would be good for the library and good for the planet. Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce our featured reader. David Pace. David Pace is a fiction and narrative nonfiction writer, journalist, and editor. His debut novel, a coming-of-age story told with magical realism, is titled Dream House on Logan Drive. He is also a contributor to 4 anthologies of creative writing. His other creative work has appeared in the journals Quarterly West, Alligator Juniper, Ellipses, Literature and Art, Sunstone, Mapping Literary Utah, Dialogue, and the Quarterly. His work has received multiple awards, including 4 from the Utah Original Writing Competition and one each from Writers at Work, Dialogue, and the Association for Mormon Writers. His most recent book is American Trinity and Other Stories from the Mormon Corridor, which was published in February and from which he will be reading and discussing tonight. So welcome.
So I always say that if there's more people in the audience than that are speaking at a book reading, it's success. I count this as a success. I did bring some books.
Great. Yeah, you can leave them on the table.
Is this good?
Okay. That's perfect.
I better use one to read from. Thank you so much for having me up here. This is the first time I've been in this building. Last time I was at Helicon West, it was in the old building, I guess. And this has always been one of the stops that people, especially from Utah, want to be at because it's storied, no pun intended. It's been around for a while, and it's a little bit like the Wild West, you know, especially if you get the open mic going.
That's
So
right.
I've always enjoyed that part. In fact, I was asked by Star back in the day to blurb the collection, the anthology that you guys put out, of many of the writers that have been at Helicon West over the years. And I was always a little annoyed because I wasn't in there, but I hadn't read yet.
Right.
So now I get to make good on it. I get to endorse Helicon West before I actually came up and read from my novel. Thank you for coming out.
David?
Yes.
Some people
Oh,
can't
yes,
hear.
I'm sorry. I knew that. I was testing it. I'm actually waiting for my sister in Logan. I had dinner with them earlier today.
This is a collection of short fiction that dates back, stories here date back to 1984, so quite a while. And over the years, I just kept kind of, you know, a story isn't done until a publisher takes it out of your hand, right? And then it's over, right? So the idea, we don't really write as writers, I've decided. We rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. Somebody says, you know, how hard is writing? And it's not hard at all. You just sit at the computer and you look at the screen and you put your fingers on the keyboard and you think and you think and you think and think until little tiny beads of blood pop out. It's not hard at all. So it's very gratifying to see a collection of short fiction come out. It's very hard to get a collection of short fiction out these days. Feel very fortunate to have had BCC Press pick this up, so I want to thank them as well. I don't want to read for too long because there's nothing worse than a long, boring read. But I think I'm going to read from a couple stories, including the title story, American Trinity. This was my first short story that I ever had published. I kind of fell in love with the main character myself. I obviously hope that other people will as well. And in fact, I fell in love with the character so much that I ended up rewriting my novel in his voice. So, not so much in his voice, but he was the narrator. He's kind of this immoral character that follows this kid around in Provo, Utah, tries to keep him from dying, from growing up in a community that he struggles with for whatever reason back in the 70s and 80s, and both faith-related, cultural-related, and family-related. So the character of American Trinity is based on what Mormons call the three Nephites. If you come from a Jewish background, it's kind of the Mormon equivalent of the wandering Jew who was cursed back in the day of Christ to wander the earth until Christ came again because of he didn't help Jesus out in the streets of Jerusalem when he was being crucified. So there's this mythology in Judaism called the wandering Jew, and Mormons have their own version. It's called Three Nephites, based upon three particular disciples of Christ in the Book of Mormon, who are given immortality to wander the earth until Christ comes again to bring people to the Lord. This particular of the three Nephites is not very happy right now. He's kind of sick of wandering around waiting for Jesus to show up. So his name is Zed. And it's in his voice that I'm going to read from. I need to indicate trigger language here. There is a mention of rape in this. It's not particularly graphic, but there is a mention of it, so I understand that if you have a problem with that, you should be prepared for that if you need to leave. So I'm just going to read the opening of this. The other two are more patient than I am. They bide their time. What's worse, Jonas is always telling me that I'm shirking my duty. I haven't talked to him in over a century. 150 years, the last one I talked to Kuman. Even though I have returned to my mission, wandering, ministering, both would insist I have lost the spirit of the assignment. I avoid them now. I was just coming out of the Empire Theater in old New York when I last talked to Jonas. Word must have gotten out. Like myself, Jonas was dressed as a patron in tuxedo, gloves, courtly old Jonas. I like the collapsible opera hat, I told him. Nice touch. You're playing with me, Zed. that I should even feel compelled to be here is an embarrassment. He looked about wild-eyed at the throng of velveted ladies and their escorts, climbing into broughams parked under gas lamps. How long has it been? I asked, putting on my own clothes. The courts of Montezuma? We go where we are called to go, he intoned. And he looked at me, bemused. You're the one holed up in the theater district. Shameful. Yes, but isn't it interesting that every time you decide to make an appearance, it's where there happens to be a lot of social position, a lot of pretty ladies? I said, nodding in the direction of another exiting entourage. Even if it is an embarrassment, Jonas looked at me with practiced contempt. Then he asked me for one of the new manufactured cigarettes for which I had recently given up my pipe. Convenience. Plus, I needed the change. Any kind of change. We walked down 40th Street, stepping over muddy wagon ruts. In the restaurant, Jonas ordered wine and oysters while I smoked and studied the lace drapes on windows behind him. Unlike Jonas, who covets the world's beautiful artifacts, I am simply amazed that the living who will die go to such efforts to create them at all. The crystal chandeliers brought over from old world Bohemia, the coffered ceilings of the rich. During the centuries of catastrophic Nephite wars, a man would intricately etch his sword as if his life depended, not so much on the might of the metal, but on how beautifully it could kill. But as my two colleagues and I, left behind by edict, moved through the carnage with our amulets, our consecrated oils, our prayers, there was no way to see the wounded as dying beautifully. Even when I was in old New York with Jonas, the senior one, and eating oysters, I had surmised that this life we led was the way it was always going to be. For the three Nephites, this was it. There would be no return of Jesus to mark the end of days and the end of our mission. That was why I was going to the theater, to escape. And after 3 glasses of wine, I told Jonas that. You've lost your faith, he said. Oh, I've lost my life. Nonsense. The Lord has kept his promise to us. We are still here, aren't we? He took another sip from the finely cut crystal glass and returned it carefully to the table. He leaned back in his chair and breathed in the night, then continued as if it were an afterthought. You've been here since the days of Zarahemla, a full life for us, if there's ever been one. We had families, children, gave them our blessing before they went. No, I interrupted. You had children. You watched them die of old age. I had no children. I was always alone. I'm still alone. Jonas shook his head at me, the rims of his eyes pomegranate red. I'll admit, when I received the calling nearly 2,000 years ago, it seemed like a good idea. Minister to the earth's inhabitants, and then, at the second coming, go right into heaven, in the twinkling of an eye, as the book says. Perhaps you're lucky, Zed, he finally said. It was merciless to watch my grandchildren die of old age. Even more so to see their grandchildren slaughtered needlessly. Well, maybe it was needed, part of the history that must be written. That's not what bothered me. There will always be wars. No, it was how they turned against themselves and those bastard robbers, he spat, referring to the Gadianton robbers, which still existed. A parallel order held together by secrecy and oaths, and by the constant manufacture of an outside enemy to distract the people. In old New York, They were now called magnates. Each of us is alone, said. You meet not Kunin, I mused. He has his fans. Jonas sensed my attitude. I had been watching too much restoration drama, and I was becoming a cynic. He likes it out there. He likes the desert, I said, unlike you. What do you mean? He's probably eating locusts right now, on principle. Not exactly hot terrapin or oysters. We go where we are called to go, he repeated, annoyed. And also where there happen to be urban wonders and warm baths and bottles of Bordeaux. I lifted my glass. He reluctantly toasted. I'm doing my time, he said. Well, it is more like a sentence, a promise, and it's not over yet. Jonas sighed. He pushed his plate away, the outline of his moving arm blurring ever so slightly in the air. It's the only feature that might distinguish us from others, a sort of full-body halo that lightly pulses around each of us and can only be seen by children and the occasional drunk, whose vision is already failing at the edges. I am told that around my inexplicable red hair and fair skin, the hue is pink. I really thought it was all about to end with the new age of prophecy, said Jonas. Never pin our hopes to a seer who secretly takes multiple wives, and in Illinois, no less. Well, at least he translated the book before he was gunned down. We have that, thank God. Maybe the end times are upon us after all. Or maybe it's just a tease, a cosmic burlesque. You are a bitter man, said Jonas. And he drank the last of the wine, his wine. Are you going down to the docks tonight? Well, I suspect there will be the sick to attend to. Where else would I be? A box seat back at the Empire? Now is my colleague's turn to call my bluff. That was in old New York, which doesn't exist any longer, and perhaps never really did, with all of its privileged, just another version of the Gadianton robbers, this time in spats. It was the last time I saw Jonas. Well, there was the Triangle Fire 20 years later, but I couldn't bring myself to speak to him then. I can always find him if I need to, but what do you say to someone you've known that long? 2,000 years as the American Trinity, it breeds contempt. But it's contempt with a residual ache for one another. So we routinely seek one another out, trapped as we are somewhere between deity and humankind, mortal but unable to die, angelic in our transport, but rotting in our flesh, embalmed alive. All of it set forth in the book, The Sacred History of the American Continent. Now, our story may not have a certain ending, an ending at all, but it has a fabulous, inventive beginning. By the time I was born in Zarahemla, 25 years before Jesus made his New World appearance, my people had largely fallen out of favor with God. And in the turmoil, the Gadianton robbers could wreak their havoc. In the midst of their intrigues, I was busy working in the temple scriptorium, a library of worn parchments. We were attempting to abridge them to something more permanent and had to compete with the armory for gold and other metals. I didn't think we needed another sword, another shield, however beautifully wrought. What we needed was the story. I actually paid attention to all the old tales I was transcribing, and I imagined what it was like to be one of my Hebrew ancestors, clambering into a ship and making the great journey from the old world. I made a point of infusing the accounts with the requisite miracles. Hey, there are worse things than doing that. I was too slightly built to be a warrior. So I became the hands to my old mentor, Omni, whose fingers were permanently bald and ruined. He'd always seemed to care more about the written traditions than about war. And so did I. His work was to tell a story, to reset old writings into plates of soft alloys, and to interpret them for our day. Omni made us all part of a continuing tale. Show me a people who don't feel connected to their own biblical saga, he told me once, and I will show you a people doomed to destruction. But now, with the last of the precious metals needed for the war effort, the temple scriptorium was under siege, and Omni was failing. Lost in a fever, he lay against pillows in the corner of the room while I continued frantically to pound into metal the text from the papyri. So furious was my effort that my own fingers had begun to curl in on themselves. When the metal plates were complete, I bound them with rings and sent them out to be hidden from the enemy of the hour. You see, for the Gabion robbers, it was always a classic, let's you and them fight. The Nephites were a nation hopelessly divided, and all the robbers had to do was give us enough rope and wait. That, and use our own schismatic warriors to do their dirty work. In fact, it was these warriors, lusting for gold, who were converging on the temple. I heard voices outside. Before giving the last of the plates to the courier, I placed my hands on them and offered a prayer to the Nephite God for their protection. Suddenly there were men everywhere in the room, their thick legs wrapped in leather and metal, their spears towering above me. On their heads they wore the traditional Nephite helmet, but their faces were striped with Labanite paint. When they didn't find what they were looking for, they left, except for two of the men who took off their helmets and looked at me savagely. I knew it was my hair, an anomaly. Their mouths were wet and red with wine, their own hair long and tangled. You, bellowed the biggest of the two, hiding yourself here with a worthless old man who steals our gold while we fight his wars. And with that, he took his spear and slowly pressed it through Omni's chest so that his eyes opened wider and wider for one revelatory moment while he reached up with both arms as if to embrace a phantom deliverer. I could not go to Omni. Was it because I knew it wouldn't do any good, or was I just afraid? Words, however, never failed me. Your wars have become the games of boys, I screamed, thinking I could shame them into silence. You are Gadianton's lackeys, fighting for your own illusions and your own pleasure in death. Today you will die, the warrior shouted. No, you will die, and all of this, I said, gesturing at the room of now scattered papyri and metal filings, will be the only meaning left to your vandal lives. That's the way the story goes, how it got recorded. Omni pinned against crimsoned pillows, my fear turning to outrage. I had silenced the thugs, but not because they were interested in meaning, but in my person. They moved in on me, patting my head as if I were a house dog. They took me by the hair, spread my legs, and raped me. After that, I knew I had to believe. Not only did the prophecies need to be saved for posterity, the story had to be real, not just a beautiful literary device. They needed to be something that took place in real space, in real time, where truth and accuracy aren't always contingent. The prophecies were that the Messiah was coming now in a local appearance. That is how I remember it, through the record that now exists as the book. That the Messiah would save me, Zedekiah,
stories, when I say the Mormon corridor, stories from the Mormon corridor, this is kind of, the Mormon corridor is, and I use the word Mormon unapologetically. I'm just sorry about that. I'm sorry that the church fathers and Hindus say the church of saints every time we say it. No, we're Mormon, and I'm a Mormon. I consider myself a post-Mormon, even though I haven't been to church in 30 years. So that's my soapbox. But the Mormon corridor is a cultural space as well. It runs all the way up to Canada, where polygamists fled in order to escape persecution, right down through this area that we're in now, Idaho, conveniently skipping Park City, which is not a part of the Mormon corridor. But all the way down through Arizona, all of which was settled by Brigham Young and his followers, all the way up to San Bernardino, Los Angeles, right down into northern Mexico, where my great-great-grandfather died, also trying to escape for his polygamous activities. So my ambition as a writer is to write about the culture. And so a recent reviewer called me a cultural anthropologist of Mormonism. And I like that. I'll take that. I'm not here to be devotional. I'm not here to be critical. I'm here to tell a story about what it's like to live in what I call the Mormon corridor, which is a psychic space as much as it is geographic. So really quickly, I thought I would read one more story. This is called Damascus Road, and it's set in contemporary times. Yeah, I think I have time to read the whole thing, sure. I am a religious man, Paul told him for the second time, through the haze of too many bass ales. I can help you. The man in his kippah and Orthodox garb squinted up at him, mouth twisted, fringe from his palate, dripping off his sides like old pasta. It was Friday night in Midtown Manhattan. The Jewish man started in again, not really pacing up and down 7th Avenue, but turning this way and that, gesturing downtown from where Paul had come, weaving from the Irish pub near the Sheraton in his drunken grievance. Now Paul had a situation. Not just a street person asking for money or the time of day. Here was an inconsolable man playing off his innocence to the big city, just as Paul was. Am I religious, thought Paul? Still? No one would be answering the phone at the yeshiva upstate, having been relieved of his wallet by filthy homeless people, the man explained to Paul. He hadn't had the money to pick the bus back before sundown. He had said this with much woe, wagging his head, which, though bearded, was missing the extravagant curled tail, typical of many of the Orthodox in New York. The man was visiting from Tel Aviv and wanted to see the city. Now this. I went to the police. I sit there for 2 hours and left, he said through an accent, his hands drawn to his face, covering his eyes, as if trying to transport himself away from the city by not looking at it. The January wind was picking up. He drew his dark wool jacket around him tighter. Paul turned toward his own hotel on Lexington, walking the man back with him. The visitor finally quieted, sat in the upholstered chair and smoked a thin, stinking cigarette. Paul sat on the bed in the tiny room, the beer in his head finally clearing. On the way back to his room, Paul had to find a place to pee on the cross street to the hotel, between a parked car, brown car, and a backhoe, and rest. Returning, Paul had put his arm around the stooped, frightened man who was close to his own age to reassure him. He had told him that he had done a kind of pilgrimage to Israel when he was in college, and that more than once he had been to Tel Aviv on business. That being a religious man himself,
understood the difficulties one's faith could present. What Paul didn't say was that, like his impromptu guest who would be spending the night with him, he too was violating the rules of his creed. First, there was the drinking and whatever he was going to find in the direction away from the Irish pub that night, a sex shop, prostitute. And then there was the fact that he hadn't been to church since his divorce 3 years earlier. What line of work are you in? Paul asked, to get the man's mind off his troubles. The man squinted at Paul. What do you do in Tel Aviv? Paul rejoined. You know, job. The man stubbed his cigarette out in the makeshift ashtray. Lawn furniture, he said. My name is Saul. You are a kind man. He worried over the cigarette butt, rubbed it into the bottom of the glass until the flecks were scattered like ground pepper. I can repay you, he continued. When you are next in Israel, you will be my guest. They readied for bed. Saul sighed and stood to unbutton his shirt, draping it over the back of the chair. He turned his back to Paul, looked around. Then he removed the fringed talet katan, which he folded carefully and set aside. Paul pretended to arrange something atop the bureau. In the mirror, he could see Paul's back, a profound uncertainty welting his shoulders. Finally, Saul stripped off his sleeveless t-shirt. His chest and arms were stout, with coarse black hair. Paul turned, removed his own overcoat, then his sweater and shirt, revealing the scooped neck of his cotton undergarment and its tiny stitched symbols, the compass and the square, one over each breast. The two men looked at each other. I can shower? Saul asked. Of course, said Paul. What else can you say? Towels are there. He gestured toward the bathroom. Saul turned to drop his pants to the floor. Underneath, he was wearing skivvies, a sort of bikini bottom in the wildest colors Paul had ever seen. Fuchsia bands, hot pink swirls over dark purple. Still, Saul's kippah rested on his head as he disappeared into the bathroom. Will you switch light on for me? He asked, returning momentarily to the room and suddenly looking elfin. Paul flipped the switch for Saul and pulled the door shut behind him. He looked at the bed, a full, not even queen size. Were they really going to sleep there tonight? Two men, complete strangers? What was he thinking of? He looked through his luggage, zipped it closed, then opened it and placed his wallet inside, zipped it back closed. He turned around and Saul was standing there in a towel, his kippah still atop his head. He pulled his skivvies back on under his towel, dropped the towel, and got into bed. Only when he was lying on his back did he carefully remove the kippah and place it on the bedstand. The light burned above the headboard. Paul flipped the bathroom light off. Saul lay in bed, the sheet pulled up under his chin, hair on his knuckles. Paul removed his pants and stood there in his thin, white temple garment, extending to his knees. Symbols not only on each side of his chest, but over his belly and right knee. Saul looked at him curiously. Christian? He asked. Sort of, replied Paul. They stared at each other until Paul felt the tired, ancient need to explain himself. It's like a second skin, sort of, he said. I think I might, he gestured at the chair, stay up for a bit. I'm sorry, Saul said. I can sleep there. No, said Paul. I'm wanted this way. You need your rest. After a moment of looking at each other, Saul turned away in the bed. Paul picked up one of the pillows, then reached up over the bed and turned off the light. Thank you, he heard Saul say in the dark. Settling into the chair, Paul pulled his overcoat up over him, settling in. The booze in his blood had long left him. In place of it was the dreary promise of morning. Within 30 minutes, he woke up with a start on the floor in a fetal position. He went to the bathroom, looked at the bathtub, then returned to the chair. Finally, he crawled into the bed next to Saul, listening to the edge. There was the squeaking of the springs, what seemed a cacophony of shifting starched sheets, which kept him from the awkward silence he knew would ensue once he lay still. He was just so tired. Saul talked in sleep, in Hebrew, or was it Yiddish? Paul didn't know. At one point, Paul found Saul's hand between his legs. He placed Saul's hand back where it belonged and rolled to his left. Later, Paul rolled into Saul, spooning him, the hair on Saul's legs pricking him. Saul shook him off, so that Paul got up, took off his garment top. Then 15 minutes later, got back up and put it back on. The garment was something he could not bring himself to permanently shed, despite his backsliding, but still bore hidden under his clothes, even when he was out drinking and whoring. Lying there, wide awake, he thought about all of his secrets. And then, before finally drifting off to sleep, deep sleep, he thought of the morning and the erection he would inevitably have. He figured that Saul, observant Jew or not, would suffer the same break of day affliction. It occurred to Paul that they were both circumcised. The next morning, Saul seemed less agitated, but still eager to return to the yeshiva despite it being Shabbos. The ox was in the mire, right? Didn't Saul wait in some version of that? Or for Paul, was that just a euphemistic rationale back home for breaking the Sabbath whenever one wanted? No matter. Saul had to get back upstate now. It was early. The two men had gotten less than 5 hours of sleep, if you could call it sleep. They dressed. Paul offered to walk Saul to Port Authority for his bus. On the way, Paul thought to buy Saul a coffee. Saul fidgeted just inside the door of the coffee shop, as if his very presence in the place of commerce on the day of rest would bring down the wrath of his God. Paul handed him his covered cup and started for the door, but Saul beelined for the sugar and cream. 10 sugar packs total, Paul counted them. At the bus, Paul talked with the driver briefly and then gave Saul his ticket and a 20. The driver will tell you when to get off. Can you walk from there to the yeshiva? Saul nodded, then took out a pen and wrote his name and phone number onto a scrap of paper he picked up off the platform. When in Israel? Said Saul. Standing there, Paul knew he was just the goy with whom Saul regrettably had to spend the night, but he took the paper anyway and nodded. On the way back to the hotel to get ready for his cab ride to the airport, Paul walked slowly, his head aloft like a balloon above him from the night before. It was the Sabbath, but not his Sabbath, and he determined that when he got back to Salt Lake, away from New York, which always seemed to bode trouble for him, to confuse him, that he would go back to the ward house and confess his sins to the bishop, or maybe he would just relieve himself of his temple garments once and for all, cut out and burn the symbols as required before throwing the sacred underwear away. His second skin. Hours later, he awoke on the plane. He could hear the drone of the engines outside and the air vent above him, but he could see nothing, as if he were suddenly blind. He heard a voice. He remembered the eye shades, took them off, and was blinded again, but this time by daylight. Outside the window, the earth was flat, etched with giant, fallow circles of farmland. Out near the horizon, rays of light shattered into haze. His head still throbbed. Suspended as Paul was, he wondered what he would do with himself when he got home. He looked down, but the prairie below had no answer for him. He thought of Saul back at the yeshiva. Did he have to explain to anyone what happened, how or why he had broken the Sabbath? Did anyone actually care? He heard the voice again and understood. Yes, and I testify that Joseph Smith did seek God the Father in his Son Jesus Christ. In upstate New York, asked a second voice. That is correct, in Palmyra, New York. And what's more, I know that you too can know as I do, without a shadow of doubt, that the church the prophet Joseph established is the true church. This was what had awakened Paul to the emptiness outside his window and in his head. Across the aisle sat a woman holding a blue paperback book he recognized all too well. And next to her, a young man in a white shirt and tie, scrubbed ears all aglow, a look of divine frenzy in his face. He caught the missionary's eye, or did the elder catch his? Was this a sign? Thought Paul. And then he felt a keen resentment about it all, whatever all was. Fastest growing church in the world. He repositioned his eye shade, lights out, and turned his head away from the scene. He thought of how close he was, all of them, in this flying tin can, to instant death just beyond the thin skin of the flame. It reminded him of a poem his high school teacher had scratched into the blackboard back in the day. A poem he thought of often, actually about tugging at the ripcord and the parachute refusing to open. What does one do? Paul would panic at first, of course, thrashing and screaming, but then he would stop, per the poet's suggestion. Breathe in the view, open his arms wide, tranquil as the sky above him and the earth below, and for one single moment, the universal void would be within his embrace.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay. Now we're going to move into the open mic portion of this event. And so I just want to say what an excellent reading that was. Thank you. And so I forgot to fix my next sheet. And so I'm just going to read 3 names at a time. So our first 3 readers will be Mike, Jan, and Brock. And I forgot to say, if you don't want to be recorded, you can tell our recorder not to videotape you. And would anybody else like to sign up for open mic? Okay. Mike, Jan, and Brock.
That was excellent, thank you. I tried not to laugh out loud, and I know you had a lot of fun writing that. I'm going to defend Adam and Eve this evening. This is called The Challenge of Perspective. It's in my book, and I hope I had as much fun writing this as you did. I really I went off the charts a little bit and came this thing altogether different from the rest. There are 100 planets in our galaxy and about 2 trillion galaxies in the universe, leaving us with one question. Is there life on other planets? To which the only answer relative to this subject is, it would be strange if there were not. The question of first life, projected at about 4.4 billion years, still a puzzle to some scientists, even though first life has been assimilated under laboratory conditions, making it evident that the rudiments of RNA could have come together naturally on our small planet. Some scientists explain it as a primordial soup, in which the right chemicals accumulated in water and formed the first RNA. How does it happen? Biological accidents are over vast amounts of time, typically called mutations, are responsible for change. Many of these are lethal, some are not. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, which is necessary for life forms like us, are a product of RNA, and the result being all life as we know it is the result of naturally occurring events. The first bioorganisms began to emerge at about 3.8 billion years ago. The first animals that may have been ancestral to us began to appear at about 3.2 million years ago. We grouped them under the name Australopithecus. Human-like creatures showed up at around 2 million years ago, and we grouped them under the name Homo. Cognition, thinking, and the ability to call someone an asshole followed at around 70,000 years ago. We can also call this thinking thing choice behavior, which is the result of a mutation or accident resulting in the cerebral cortex. As thinking evolved, instinct behavior, fight or flight, began to take a back seat to choice behavior. With the cerebral cortex, cognitive evolution gave us the capacity for enhanced survival as well as the capacity for enhanced destruction, a sad but necessary trade-off to choice behavior. From that time, over 20,000 gods were born, along with the rest of the stuff that came with choice behavior, like language and information and ideas like origin stories such as Adam and Eve, type fictions. Every culture has its origin story. I like the novel book best, but that's for a different book. As our cognitive abilities broadened, we needed answers to all kinds of questions. For instance, many cultures have a savior and a scapegoat mentality built into the matrix of its philosophies. There are 12 Christs and a bunch of devil-made-me-do-it characters scattered out over time in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and India before the Nazarene Christ happened along. The human brain, which is less than 3% of our body's mass, uses 26% of the body's energy. What do we use all this energy for? A Jewish kid. Yuval Noah Harari, with peculiar mind foreseeing the obvious behind the mysteries of human behavior over large expanses of time, wrote a best-selling book entitled Sapiens, A Brief History of Mankind. One of the best books I've ever read. Yuval Noah Harari achieved a PhD in history from the University of Oxford and now lectures at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In his book, he explains what we use that 20% of the energy for. This is a quote from him. The truly unique feature of our language is not its ability to transmit information about men and whatever. It's the ability to transmit information about things that do not exist at all. As far as we know, only sapiens could talk about entire kinds of entities that they have never seen, touched, or smelled. Legends, myths, gods, and religions appeared for the first time with the cognitive revolution. Thank you.
again.
And I got it here somewhere. There it is. My piece. My piece is called parentheses. Parentheses. I've been thinking a bit about parentheses. Parenthetically speaking, what is the origin of the word? And is it at all related to parenting? I only ask because parentheses seem to surround and protect a thought or a word or a meaning, and therefore have a protective connotation, much like parents do with their children. However, my parents dropped their curved protection around me when I was 17 years old, their youngest and most precocious child. And when I became a parent, I only had one half of the curved protection, being single, and therefore had to rush to and fro to provide the double protection for my children. And I probably failed terribly. My parents did a number on me when they got divorced. I eventually forgave my mother, and she more than made up for things over time. Although we never discussed what happened that fateful year, those damn parentheses, we had many years of a strong, loving relationship before she passed away. My father, on the other hand, was another story entirely. After the divorce, he quickly remarried and let his new wife dictate all sorts of crazy to him. He gave up his beloved golf game. Growing up, we didn't see much of him because he was always on the golf course. He gave it up for her. He retired and gave up his career when she told him to. They moved to where she wanted to live. He gave up his old friends and only associated with her friends. But worst of all, he disowned his 3 children. And he embraced her 4 children from her first marriage. While my siblings and I were disowned, those other children got college educations, new cars, trips abroad, you name it. There was a 40-year period where I had no contact with my father at all. And then one of his stepsons, one who had been given so much over the years, started fleecing my dad. He stole his credit card and rang out over $80,000 in debt. He stole jewelry from his mom and my dad, including my dad's prized West Point ring, and hawked them. He stole medications from them, pain pills, and started to interfere with their home health care. He also threatened them with bodily harm. My dad and his wife were living in Salt Lake City at the time, and I got called to help. I spent many hours on the phone canceling and getting reimbursement for the $80,000 that had been charged on my dad's account by his stepson. I met with Salt Lake City Police and took out a restraining order on the stepson. I filed reports on elder abuse with an attorney. I wrestled control of my dad's finances to keep an eye on them and became a power of attorney for him. I spent every single weekend in Salt Lake dealing with these issues for about 6 months, and then on and off throughout the remaining 10 years of his life. By the end of his life, I was the only one taking care of him and his issues. Seems like I found the parentheses that he had dropped.
Usually I just read one, but you're going to wish for something lighter after this first one. So, as I'm sure you're aware, Republicans in Utah and around the country have been doing what they can to remove black experience from schools and textbooks. And the justification given is that if a white student read about slavery, they might feel ashamed. My response to that is, yeah, that means they're thinking, feeling human beings, and that they might actually learn something. So this is called in defense of shame. I'm not ashamed to be ashamed. Without shame, we have no boundaries, no morality. Shame is the price we pay for doing what we know is wrong. Shame might prevent us from doing wrong again. When I read my country's history, the genocide of the natives, the horrors of slavery, the decimation of beaver and bison, I was ashamed. When my country was dropping burning jelly and mutating herbicide on millions of innocent Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians, just because no American president could say no, I was ashamed. When my country responded to terror with waterboarding, electroshock, sleep deprivation, sexual humiliation, extraordinary rendition, I was ashamed. When my country voted for the most morally vacant politician in American history, a man with no shame, who puts his profit above the future of the planet, I was ashamed. And every day when I hear that with my tax money, more hospitals have been bombed, more journalists killed, more aid workers targeted, more children deliberately starved to death, I am unbearably ashamed. Okay. Shannon and I walk on the Bonneville Shoreline Trail a lot and look down on the town, on some of the most expensive houses in the town. And this is what we see. It's called Mormon houses. The cheap ones dribble down the street like frogs' eggs, laid in long straight lines, vinyl every color of beige. Owners wanting a touch of wild face the street with even 4 different siding materials, all of them manufactured. Up on the bench, the rich obey the precepts of tasteless ostentation. They like columns, big manly plantation columns, and 2-story front entries with muscular arches, stiff as a starched tuxedo shirt. Lawns free of kids' toys, condemned as trashy by the HOA. Personality asserted by the well-come flag and the early October Christmas lights, the only color in their black and white world. In both neighborhoods, everything is plastic, enlivened by splashes of industrial stone or vertical vinyl. Few signs of steel, even fewer of wood. Maintenance just a hosing down every few years, sterile as a speculum. The grass, of course, is perfect chemical green, thick, crisply trimmed. All angles are sharp, all flowers ruby. Ubiquitous white vinyl fences keep neighbors and nature at bay. Windows pock the blank walls, small and few, one always keeping an eye on the closest neighbor. So I announce the next 3. Yeah, Shannon.
We gotta say thanks to Brock for the
Shannon, Lisa, and Pam.
Mine are both about my stroke. And this one's called the egg. The egg. The first time I tried to crack an egg after the stroke, I smashed its ground shell too hard against the rim of the red ceramic bowl. I stared at the cold egg yolk slime dripping down my stunned hand. And this one's called the stroke. The stroke walks me across orange desert sand. Princess plume bloom like gold torches. Desert varnish paints the rocks shiny black. My mouth is dry. Warm evening air softly holds my body. The stroke has to show me something. He can barely contain his eagerness. He prances ahead, turning ecstatic circles. He is contagious. I am excited too. He disappears. I call and call, but he's nowhere, nowhere. I am nothing. I feel nothing. I am nothing. A sudden red-brown explosion on the horizon, billowing. Its updraft sucks up sand, stones, cacti in slow motion. The sky chokes on a white mushroom cloud. I watch as the ground swells, surges closer, closer. I can't escape. Alone, standing in the cold desert, In the cold hospital room, I watched the MRI of the stroke devastating my brain, eating my brain, the entire left hemisphere. The white roar rushes. I'm blasted. I land hard on my back. Suddenly I am deaf. My ears leak blood. I'm dumbstruck. My lips blister. My skin melts like gold.
Guys, can you hear me well? I have a hard time hearing when people aren't speaking into the mic, so I hope you can hear me. In the pastel sunset palette, the mapled trees' dried leaves look like crumpled paper.
Oh, yeah. Love it.
Two of my favorite Christmas memories involve my neighbor, Alice. She was a wonderful neighbor and is still a wonderful friend. When my little girls were 2 and 5, it was Christmas Eve. We'd had dinner, they'd had a bath and wear their nightgowns. They went outside the back door to feed the dog. And when they came in, their eyes were just so wide and they said, "Mom, Santa Claus is right next door at Alice's house. We've got to get to bed right now because if he comes to our house and we're not asleep, he can just pass by and not leave us anything." And I said, "Well, you better get your teeth brushed and get up to bed." And they did. And I went upstairs to read him a book, and my oldest daughter handed me a book. She said, "This is the shortest book we own, Mom. Read fast." So I read him a book and tucked him into bed, and I just laughed as I walked downstairs because it was 7 o'clock at night. They weren't going to go to sleep. It was Christmas Eve. I turned on a movie and wrapped some presents and got some last-minute things done and just waited to hear the sound of little feet coming down the stairs. But they never came down. Until 7 o'clock the next morning, we had a wonderful Christmas, and I just thought that was funny. I thought I would share it with Alice a few days after Christmas, and I told her what had happened, and she thought that was fun. The next year, my girls were 3 and 6, and we would take sugar cookies decorated for the holidays around to the neighbors, and we would sing Christmas carols and give them a plate of cookies. We made sure that we went to Alice's house before Santa Claus came, because every year this was a tradition they had. Their family would gather, all the kids and grandkids. Santa Claus would come, let them open one present that night. They'd have a dinner, a family dinner, and a fun family night. And so I made sure we got to Alice's before Santa Claus came, and I knew a lot of their family. And just as they were coming in, I was visiting with a few of them, but trying to keep an eye on the time. And then I heard jingle bells outside. And I said to Alice, "Santa Claus is here. Can we go out the back door?" And she said, "No, it's okay." And I said, "No, we've got to leave. I want to get my girls out before they see him." And she said, "Just wait a minute." And I couldn't understand what Alice was thinking, and I just looked at her mother to mother and trying to impose this thought that Santa Claus was going to come into their living room and start calling out grandkids' names and have a gift for them, and there wouldn't be a gift for my kids, and that was going to be so awkward and embarrassing, and I was trying to be a good mom, but I couldn't figure out how to get out of there. And Santa Claus called a couple of names, and the grandkids went up and got their present. And then Santa Claus called my youngest daughter's name. And I know it was my youngest daughter's name. They didn't have a granddaughter with that name. And Alice looked at her and she said, "Go get your present from Santa." So she went up there and got her present, came back and opened it. And I was just amazed. Santa Claus called a couple of other names, and then he called my oldest daughter's name. And she went up and got a present from Santa. And my eyes were big. And I was just, I couldn't believe that night. It was just magical. We went back home, went to bed, had a wonderful Christmas Day the next day. And Alice and her family finished their family party. A couple of days after Christmas, I stopped at Alice's house and thanked her again and said, "Alice, how did you know we were going to be at your house right when Santa was there?" And she said, "You know, I didn't know if you would be there or not. But if you weren't there, I was going to send Santa next door to your house." Well, that would have been pretty amazing. But I thought the night was just amazing the way it happened. And their generosity and their giving spirit and the kindness that they showed to us all the time, not just at Christmas, has just stayed with me. That memory stays with me. My daughters remember that. And I'm still friends with Alice. I still go visit her at Christmas. I don't mail her card anymore. I go and visit her. She's in her 90s now, but she's still a kind, generous, wonderful woman, and it just embodies the spirit of Christmas to me. So thanks for letting me share that memory.
Right now? Really? Okay. It's me.
I thought there were more first. So this is great. We'll get done in no time at all, because mine is short too. And it's, you know, I live on that, or I did live, I still do, but differently, on that Mormon corridor. Thank you, David, for that wonderful reading. And thanks everyone for reading. What some good readings we had tonight. So this is a memoir that I've revised, and it is called Lie. The pioneers came long before my parents platted out a homestead, before they measured my allotment, 1/9 of their land. The land was never mine. When they dug my footings, it was on a promise made in their faith. I was a covenant, built to their specs. My house was built crooked in its bones. I tried to fix it with fakeries. The blouse and skirt I made my mother buy when Dad was dead and I insisted on expense. The gold vinyl belt, cheap flats dyed gold to match, a box of grit lifted from the store where Mother worked. Before that, in the corn patch, hiding. I was 6, my sister 4. We shaved our eyebrows off. Mine never grew back. Hers grew to bird wings, eyelashes thick as caterpillars. I bought mine at the drugstore. Lying all my life, a rug thrown down to hide a slant steep enough to roll a marble off the table. I've got to square it up, make the angles match. A winter baby born on the month in which a builder should not start. They poured my footings, then they poured my slab, and then they insulated me from freezing. Beneath my facade, I trembled. Every breeze, every earthquake, my windows cracked when they finally installed them. New doors creaked out of their jambs. I tried to repair my own haphazardness without correcting the lie. Pinky finger missing half its tip, girl body, baby fat, chubby cheeked, a picture window, curtains open, inviting wrong desire. I was milk-rich, bread-heavy stock in that wedge of family farmland, 30 years before subbed out suburbs. The crooked tooth my dentist couldn't fix. He said, every day press the right tooth back, the left tooth forward. Little sister's teeth, straight, tiny, perfect. They all fell out before they should, the DDT, they tell us. And when her permanents came in, perfect. Jealous house. Unable to save it, I left it to molder. Bird, bind, weaved, climbed the siding. Trumpet vine lifted the soffit. Bird droppings hardened, dried to dust. Chalk falling from the attic through cracks in a wood floor scarred with bygone family, long gone family. Brothers who played marbles dropped them from upstairs bedroom on sisters, walking to the cellar for a jar of peaches. Sisters afraid of spiders, of dark earth falling, of brothers hidden in the cellar. Uncles who laced up their books and carried a gun to the orchard for varmints and thieves. Grandparents dead before any of us had a chance. Ghosts in the attic, rain-soaked plaster falling from my ceiling. A ceiling weighed down by the roof that lost its shakes when I left. Cedar shakes blown off, thrown down to the soft earth. Dead birds banished from flight in a poisoned sky. No more lying. I can no longer live here. The sun and snow, the wind and rain, my never belonging in this place. Only memories stopping by and leaving the hard skin of earth and my small creation set upon it. So next time is in January, and we're having Laura Stott come, I think it's January 9th, and yeah, Woody says, thank you, Woody. I want to thank again the library and all of you and Woody for being the camera guy and the poster creator and the chair setter upper, and would you all please help him set the chairs back when we're done. And if people want to go to dinner, a group of us might go on down to Cafe Sabor, so join us if you want to, okay? All right. David is selling his books.
Yeah,
Thank you,
actually,
Shan.
this is the last stop on my book tour.
Yeah, last stop.
I brought some books that I'd be happy to provide you complimentary if you would like.
Oh my God, that is a big discount. Does that mean free?
Yeah, I don't want to schlep them back to Salt Lake, so.
Holy, well, I'm getting one.
Yeah. Well, and I'm happy to sign it as well if you would like a personal. So yeah, please. I hope I have enough. I think I do.
All right, come and get a free book or buy one. Thank you,